Alrighty. So, the new buffs came in. The new Reap the Storm buff and Blade Storm buff came in. I don't know if it means we're going to play Blade Storm on Colossus. I don't think that's going to happen. I'll have to, like, look at the numbers, but... I've done a little bit of testing with it. I've played Arms and Fury and Keys with it. I think it's serviceable, right? Like, if you're doing your weekly 10s, if you're doing, like, when you get your 12s done, you know... I think Colossus is going to be better in, like, actual, like, high key 16, 17, 18s, that kind of thing. But it's, like, doable. It's serviceable. It has potential, but I think it's kind of a pad monster instead of being really good. So, for example, here's the first pull of a Workshop 15. And you can see Reap is a significant portion of my damage. So it does a lot. Like, it does a lot of damage. But this is obviously cherry-picked from only the first pull of a Workshop 15. We just didn't kick, so we just kind of exploded. So that thing did not continue. So it's decent. And its consistent damage on AoE is pretty good. But the problem is that its single target is definitely a little weaker than Colossus. Its overall throughput, so here's an overall from a Motherload 14, that its overall is just way worse and way weaker. A lot of this Mortal Strike damage is because of the Earth Ragers on the second boss? Yeah, second boss. But, like, you see it does as much damage as Cleave, but that's also because it doesn't have the modifiers that Colossus has for Cleave. It's just execute damage, some overpower, some Mortal Strike. It is a more annoying to play because you do have to actually aim your Dreadnoughts. So, like, for example, if you're not aiming your Dreadnought right, your Dreadnought is only going to hit one target, but if you aim it correctly, because it's a line AoE, you'll hit 2 targets instead. So you do have to aim a little more with it. One of the things that honestly kind of annoy me about Warriors, having to aim, cleave, aim, demolish, all that kind of stuff. So it's a little more annoying. It's also, if you look at this overall in this key, Dreadnought is also fairly weak. It's doing about as much damage as our Deep Wounds, so it's like okay. It would put Overpower probably somewhere up here if these are combined. And it's a little simpler. There's less to think about, I think, is one thing that people might like this build. Because you don't have to think about it as much. You kind of plug and play. You just hit the cleave button, you overpower, you hit the MS button when you run out of other stuff, right? There's not too much to think about. When you go to Colossus has a bit more cooldowns to juggle, things to think about. Its opener's a little more hectic. You have an additional cooldown between Demolish, an additional conditional with collateral damage, whether or not you're using your Warbreaker or your Ravager with it or whatever, right? So there is a lot of more juggling. I'd say Colossus is a little harder, but definitely more rewarding and far more tankier than Slayer. Slayer has no defensive potential, whereas you get 5% DR just from this talent alone. You get your Shockwave gets to knock up, and you get the Veteran's Vitality, which is very, very nice. So I still think Colossus will have the edge over in Keys, especially for arms. I think the buffs make Slayer arms fine in Keys. Like, you can play it if you want to. It's not that big of a deal. It's just not as good and not going to... Honestly, I don't think it feels as good because you just have a bit more control over your damage as Colossus, whereas Slayer, it's like, hey, did I get a bunch of reprocs? Cool. Did I not proc very much? It feels bad. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm probably going to still play Colossus. I don't really have any intention on swapping over to Slayer. I might mess with it a little more. That's kind of where we're at. I've got my Resilient 16s done. I've kind of been on the back burner for Keys for a bit, just because got my Resil 16s, haven't really looked into doing 17s yet. I've been leveling another guy, kind of waiting on the turbo boost to come through, pump up all the eye level. Everybody's going to get back into Mythic Plus and have the gear ready and all that kind of stuff. So, and the dinars. So I'm kind of just waiting for that. But then here is the 15 Priority of the Sacred Flame. We barely timed this key, by the way. Barely timed this key. A lot of a lot of deaths. I will say, for one of the things very nice about Fury is when you look at these bosses, like, our single target comparatively to other classes is so good. Our single target is so good. When you play Fury, obviously there's a bit skewed here because of this. When you on the 2 target, like the first boss, definitely we're falling a little behind. But I will say the sheer boss damage of Fury is just so good. I just hope they unleash its cap a little bit because its single target just feels so good, man. But this is a Priory 15, probably one of the highest mob counts in the game as far as what we can do for Slayer. So I did this as Slayer Fury, and I'll show the build here. And it was weird. One of the, like, I still think Thane is going to be better, right? I still think Thane is better. This is the build I played. But one of the things that's very weird that you end up running into this build is because you keep wanting to get, through the Slayer hero talents, more Bladestorm CER, you can end up casting a lot more Executes. You end up using, because you're trying to proc Reap as much as possible, you can see this is my Reap the Storm damage, and the Bladestorm damage is actually pretty high. But you can see how low my Raging Blow damage is because there's so many mobs. I'm constantly just casting Bloodthirst over and over and over again in AoE situations to just get that Reap proc as much as possible. So it's good, it does decent damage, but I think one of the pitfalls of the spec playing in higher end keys is honestly the fact that you don't hit Raging Blow that much. It's weird to say that, right? But I do think that the fact that you don't really hit Raging Blow that much, and if you type Raging Blow, right? If you type Raging Blow, look at your talent tree light up, right? Just look how much interacts with Raging Blow in your talent tree, and you are barely pressing it comparatively. You press it on single target, but in AoE, you are just slamming Bloodthirst over and over again. So it feels really weird. Raging Blow is so big in this talent tree when you compare it to something like Bloodthirst. Oh, that's a big... So this is a lot... Okay, this is a lot of light-ups for Bloodthirst, but most of these aren't, like, full interaction, like, plus damage for it. Honestly, I thought it was less. But the one thing Raging Blow does is it improves our Rampage damage, which goes with our tier set. Improves our Bloodthirst crit. Obviously, Bloodthirst does good and Execute as well. So, like, I don't know. It just feels... Maybe it's because I've been playing so much Raid, but it feels weird to not be prioritizing Raging Blow with how we've been playing the spec, you know? But it was something I really noticed, that I was just slamming Bloodthirst over and over and over again. It was nice to have some kind of uncapped damage for Reap, but honestly, I feel like Thane would probably still outperform. And once again, from the Colossus to Slayer debate, Thane to Slayer, Thane is way tankier now when you're doing keys. But if you want to play it, like I said, I think the buffs are pretty good and they're serviceable, right? You can play this in kind of whatever content you want. Like I said, I did a Priory 15. And I did just fine. My overall is lower, right? Because we're just hard target capped, even with having that 30% Reap buff. But it did feel fine to play. We still timed the key. So it's doable, it's playable. It's just, I don't really think it's as good, and I don't think it's as good as Colossus Arms. So I think the changes actually were good. They're targeted in the right direction. I don't know, like I said, I need to ask someone who would know better that will do the math, whether or not we're playing Ravager or Bladestorm on Colossus yet, because I don't know that. But I think the changes were pretty decent going forward. Now, okay, we talked about that. Let's talk about Dinars. Let's talk about what we should spend them on. Actually, you know, I'll just make that a whole separate video, right? I'll make that a whole separate video. I'll cut this one off, make it a little shorter, And yep, it's me yapping, and I'll make one yapping about what we spent our dinars on. Okay, bye bye.